In the heart of the bustling city, the atmosphere within Blake Enterprises was thick with tension. Richard Blake, a prominent businessman known for his ruthless approach to success, sat behind his massive mahogany desk, surrounded by towering stacks of paperwork and the glow of multiple computer screens. Despite his outward appearance of confidence, the weight of his company's impending crisis bore down on him like a storm cloud ready to burst. The quarterly reports were dismal, and the investors were restless, their patience wearing thin. As he rubbed his temples, trying to stave off the headache creeping in, Richard's gaze shifted toward the door. A soft knock broke the silence, and before he could respond, the door swung open to reveal Evelyn, his housekeeper. Clad in a simple yet elegant dress that contrasted sharply with her usual work attire, she stepped into the room, her presence as grounding as it was unexpected. "Mr. Blake, you requested me?" she asked, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Yes, Evelyn," he replied, his tone clipped. "I need you to accompany me to a business dinner tonight. It's important for networking purposes." His words hung in the air, less of an invitation and more of a command. For Richard, this was merely a strategic maneuver to showcase a semblance of normalcy in a time of chaos. Evelyn blinked in surprise, her heart racing. She had been with Richard for over 3 years, cleaning his house and tending to the myriad details of his life, but this was new territory. "A dinner?" she echoed, attempting to gauge the gravity of his request. "Just be there at 7. "Wear something nice," he added dismissively, turning his attention back to the documents sprawled before him, as if her presence no longer mattered. Though a slight twinge of disappointment flashed through her, Evelyn nodded. "Of course, Mr. Blake." As she left his office, the knot in her stomach tightened. The idea of stepping into a world of wealth and power, a world that had always seemed so distant, felt both thrilling and daunting. Later that evening, Evelyn stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the collar of her elegant dress. She couldn't remember the last time she wore something so refined. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, and she struggled to comprehend her reflection. Gone was the housekeeper in simple clothes, replaced by a woman ready to step into a realm where she felt wholly unprepared. As the clock struck 7, she took a deep breath and gathered her courage, reminding herself that she was more than just a housekeeper. She had insights, experiences, and a unique perspective that could contribute to conversations far beyond the mundane tasks of her daily life. The dinner venue was a lavish restaurant in the heart of the city, where the rich and powerful gathered to broker deals over expensive meals. Evelyn arrived, feeling like an outsider as she stepped through the grand entrance. The opulent decor and the hum of chatter from well-dressed patrons created an atmosphere of exclusivity that was almost suffocating. Richard was already seated at a large round table, surrounded by an array of investors and business partners. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "You made it," he remarked, his voice carrying an air of indifference. "Thank you for inviting me," Evelyn said, forcing a smile. But as Richard introduced her to the other attendees, it became painfully clear that her presence was merely an afterthought. "This is my housekeeper, Evelyn," he stated flatly, as if she were an accessory rather than a participant in the evening's proceedings. The investors nodded politely, their attention quickly drifting back to their discussions. Evelyn felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. Here she was, dressed to the nines but treated like an invisible ghost. As she took her seat, she could sense the dismissive glances directed her way, their subtle judgments cutting deeper than any words could. Throughout the evening, Richard spoke animatedly about the future of his company, rattling off numbers and projections while gesturing toward graphs displayed on his tablet. Evelyn sat silently, observing the dynamics at play. The conversation swirled around her, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of glasses, yet she felt utterly disconnected from it all. As the main course was served, Richard's voice grew louder, more fervent. He was in his element, discussing potential partnerships and new investments. The investors nodded in agreement, their eyes sparkling with the prospect of profit. But amidst the fervor, Evelyn began to notice a pattern. There was a distinct lack of empathy in their dialogue. Profits overshadowed people, numbers were more important than the lives they affected. It was then that Evelyn decided she would not remain silent. Her mind raced as she considered the many conversations she had had with the families of her clients, the struggles they faced to make ends meet, and the resilience they exhibited. As Richard continued to dominate the conversation, she raised her hand slightly, surprising herself with the boldness of the gesture. "Excuse me," she interjected, her voice steadied despite the waves of anxiety crashing within her. "I believe understanding the people behind the numbers is crucial for business success." The table fell silent, and all eyes turned to her, surprise etched on their faces. Richard's expression shifted from shock to irritation, but Evelyn held her ground. Mr. Lewis, an influential investor with a reputation for being blunt, raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this unexpected interruption. "Interesting perspective, Evelyn," he remarked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "What do you mean by that?" Evelyn took a deep breath, sensing the weight of the moment. "In my experience, it's not just about profit margins. It's about the impact your decisions have on people's lives. You can't build a sustainable business without understanding your customers, your employees, and the community you serve." The other investors exchanged glances, some leaning forward with curiosity while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Richard's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger flashing in his eyes. This was not how he had envisioned the evening. "Evelyn, this is not the time for such comments," he snapped, his voice laced with frustration. But Evelyn's resolve only strengthened. She wasn't just a housekeeper tonight, she was a woman with a voice, and she refused to be silenced. "I understand, Mr. Blake. But if we're to succeed, we must think beyond numbers. People matter." Her words hung in the air, a challenge that reverberated through the room. Richard's discomfort was palpable, and the tension around the table thickened. For the first time that evening, the investors were forced to confront a reality they often chose to ignore, the human element of their business dealings. The atmosphere around the table shifted, and Evelyn could feel the weight of their gazes, some skeptical, others intrigued. Richard's irritation crackled in the air, but she stood firm, determined to make her point heard. Silence enveloped the room, and the clinking of cutlery ceased as her words resonated with an unexpected clarity. Mr. Lewis, the investor who had shown interest, leaned forward, an eyebrow raised. "Tell us more, Evelyn. What do you think a successful business should prioritize?" His inquiry caught everyone off guard, including Richard, who visibly recoiled at the unexpected turn of events. Evelyn seized the opportunity, her pulse quickening with adrenaline. Businesses need to prioritize relationships, both with their employees and their customers. When a company values its people, it creates loyalty and trust. Without that, even the most profitable ventures can crumble. Richard's expression hardened. He glanced at her, his eyes narrowing. This was not what he wanted, a challenge to his authority and worldview, particularly not in front of his investors. Yet, she pressed on, drawing from her own experiences. "I've seen families struggle due to decisions made in boardrooms, decisions that overlook the human cost. People want to feel valued. They want to know that their voices matter, not just the bottom line," she continued, her voice growing more confident with each word. The tension at the table simmered, and for a moment, it felt as though Evelyn had turned the dinner into an impromptu seminar on corporate ethics. Richard, trapped between maintaining his image and the rising tide of empathy Evelyn was invoking, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The murmurs among the investors began to swell, a mix of interest and skepticism, while he fumed internally, feeling the loss of control over the evening. "I appreciate your input, Evelyn," Richard finally said, his voice strained. "But this is a business dinner, and while I admire your passion, our focus tonight should be on our potential partnerships." Evelyn felt the sting of his dismissal but refused to retreat. "With all due respect, Mr. Blake, partnerships are built on understanding and trust. If we neglect the human aspect, how can we expect any meaningful connection? How can we grow?" The silence that followed was thick with anticipation. Richard's expression shifted again, this time revealing a flicker of something that could almost be interpreted as respect, albeit buried under layers of pride and frustration. "Perhaps Evelyn has a point," Mr. Lewis interjected, his tone more conciliatory. "It's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture in our pursuit of profit. We must ask ourselves what kind of legacy we want to leave behind." Richard's face darkened. The dialogue was slipping away from him, and the uneasy glances shared among his investors only added fuel to the fire of his agitation. He glanced at Evelyn, whose confidence was palpable now. Her passion seemed to ignite something in the room, a realization that perhaps they had been too focused on numbers, too absorbed in the chase for profit. "Mr. Blake," another investor chimed in, "do you think the company could benefit from a more community-centered approach? It could enhance our public image and lead to greater customer loyalty." Evelyn's heart raced. This was exactly what she had hoped for, and she could see Richard's facade beginning to crack. "Exactly," she said, eager to build on the momentum. "People want to support businesses that care about them, not just their wallets. A focus on social responsibility can differentiate us in a crowded market." Richard's jaw clenched as he listened to the chorus of support growing around Evelyn's ideas. The dinner that was meant to reinforce his authority was turning into a platform for ideas he had never considered important. How could a woman whose primary role was to clean his home be reshaping the conversation at his own table? "I appreciate everyone's input, but we are here to discuss the future of Blake Enterprises," he managed, though his voice lacked conviction. He took a deep breath, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "Let's return to the numbers. Our market share." "Can I say something?" Evelyn interjected again, her heart pounding as she took a leap of faith. "I believe we're at a crossroads. The choices we make tonight will determine not only the future of this company but how it is perceived in the community. We have an opportunity to be leaders who inspire change, rather than just businessmen chasing profit." Richard's face was a mix of frustration and realization. The investors looked at one another, their expressions varying from doubt to contemplation. It was clear that Evelyn had touched on something deeper, something they had all sensed but had been afraid to voice. As the dinner progressed, Evelyn continued to speak, sharing insights drawn from her life experiences, highlighting the stories of people she had encountered during her time as a housekeeper, families struggling to make ends meet, children longing for opportunities, and communities yearning for respect and recognition. With each story, she painted a vivid picture of a world where businesses could thrive by investing in the very fabric of society. Richard listened, a knot tightening in his stomach. He felt exposed as Evelyn dismantled the very walls he had built around himself. Every point she made felt like a direct challenge to his worldview, one he had crafted meticulously over the years. The more she spoke, the more he realized how disconnected he had become from the people his business affected. The dinner wound on, but the energy in the room had shifted. Richard could see the spark of change igniting in the eyes of his investors. They were listening, really listening, to what Evelyn had to say. It was a dynamic he had never anticipated, and it was one that threatened to reshape not only his company but his very understanding of leadership. As the main course came to an end, Richard cleared his throat, preparing to steer the conversation back to safer waters. But Evelyn's voice, strong and unwavering, broke through again. "I'm not asking you to abandon your goals. I'm asking you to include the people affected by those goals in the conversation. Let's create a company that stands for something more than just profits. Richard's mind raced as the weight of her words settled in. Could it be that he had overlooked something fundamental? Could he, Richard Blake, the self-made man, truly have a chance to redefine his legacy? The idea was tantalizing, yet terrifying. Evelyn, your passion is admirable, he said slowly, his voice measured. But you must understand the complexities of business. It's not just about ideals. We need to be practical. But practicality doesn't have to mean sacrificing values, Evelyn countered, her determination unwavering. True practicality involves finding a balance between profit and purpose. Richard's heart raced. He had never considered such a perspective before, and yet, here was Evelyn, opening a door to a world he had shut himself off from. The discussion continued, each word weaving a tapestry of ideas and challenges, laying the groundwork for a new approach to business that could redefine the landscape of his company. As the evening wore on, Evelyn felt a shift within herself, a recognition that she was not merely a housekeeper but a catalyst for change. Her voice mattered, and in that moment, she knew she was ready to embrace the responsibility that came with it. Richard, on the other hand, faced an internal battle. He was a businessman through and through, raised to value numbers and profits above all else. But the conversation had ignited a spark of curiosity, a desire to explore the uncharted territory of leadership that values people as much as profits. As the dinner concluded, Richard felt a mixture of anger and admiration for Evelyn. How could she so easily challenge the foundations of his business philosophy? The evening had transformed from a mere dinner into an unexpected exploration of values and visions, and as he glanced at Evelyn, poised and passionate, he couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The evening wrapped up with a palpable tension lingering in the air, a mixture of unease and exhilaration. As the investors filed out of the restaurant, exchanging comments and glances, Richard found himself struggling to reconcile the chaos of the night with his perception of control. Evelyn's presence at the dinner had sparked a revolution within the confines of his mind, but it had also cast a shadow over his authority. Once the last of the guests departed, Richard and Evelyn found themselves alone in the dimly lit restaurant, the remnants of the evening's feast scattered around them. He felt a surge of anger, mixed with an inexplicable admiration for her courage. It was a strange cocktail of emotions that left him bewildered. Why did you have to speak up like that? Richard's voice was sharp, breaking the silence. He leaned against the table, arms crossed defensively. You made a fool of me in front of everyone. Evelyn stood her ground, refusing to cower under his glare. I didn't make a fool of you, Richard. I challenged the way you think about your business. If you want to grow, you have to be willing to listen to new ideas. New ideas, he scoffed, incredulous. You think I don't know what I'm doing? I've built this company from the ground up. His frustration was palpable, a storm brewing in his chest. Yes, you have. But at what cost? Evelyn countered, her voice steady and calm. You might be successful in business terms, but you've isolated yourself. You've distanced yourself from the very people your company affects. How can you not see that? Richard's anger simmered down as her words sank in. He had always prided himself on his achievements, his relentless pursuit of success. But tonight, for the first time, he was faced with the reality of his solitude. The realization hit him like a cold splash of water. Yes, he was a successful businessman, but at the expense of meaningful connections. The dinner had unearthed feelings he had buried deep, a discomfort with his choices and the people he had become. I didn't ask for your opinion, he muttered, attempting to regain control of the conversation. But deep down, he knew the truth. Evelyn's perspective was a reflection of the very questions he had been avoiding. Maybe you didn't ask, but it doesn't make it any less valid, she shot back. I've seen how your decisions affect families, the community, and even your own employees. You have the power to change lives for the better, Richard. Why wouldn't you want to use that power? Richard clenched his fists, battling with the gnawing sensation of discomfort that bubbled beneath his surface. He had always thought of himself as a man of reason, a calculated strategist. Yet here stood Evelyn, a woman who cleaned his home and cooked his meals, challenging him in a way that felt both frightening and refreshing. Let me ask you this, Evelyn, he said slowly, his voice dropping to a more contemplative tone. What do you know about running a business? She paused, taken aback by his question. I know a lot more than you might think, she replied, her confidence unwavering. I've observed the people you employ, how they feel about their jobs, and what they think of you as a leader. I've seen the struggles of families in this community and the disconnect between corporate decisions and their realities. I may not have a formal title, but I have insight. Richard considered her words. In all his years of climbing the corporate ladder, he had overlooked the value of first-hand experience. He had buried himself in numbers and forecasts, all while the human element slipped through his fingers. Maybe you're right, he admitted reluctantly, the weight of the admission heavy on his chest. But how do you suggest we change? Evelyn took a step closer, her eyes fierce with determination. You start by listening. You hold town hall meetings, engage with your employees, and hear their concerns. You show them that you value their input, that they matter. This isn't just about profits, it's about building a company that people believe in. Richard's mind raced. The thought of exposing himself to the vulnerabilities of his employees, of hearing their grievances firsthand, terrified him. But there was also a flicker of excitement. What if this could lead to a transformation, not just for his business, but for him as well? That's a lot to take in, he said, his voice softened. It would require a complete shift in how I approach my business. Exactly, she replied, a small smile breaking through her earlier intensity. And I'll help you. I can't promise it will be easy, but it will be worth it. You have the chance to redefine what leadership means. Richard felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. The prospect of working with Evelyn, the very person he had dismissed for so long, filled him with a strange sense of hope. Perhaps this was the moment he had been waiting for, a chance to reshape his identity as a leader and a human being. Over the next few days, Richard found himself replaying the dinner in his mind, reflecting on the conversations that had unfolded. He began to notice the subtle changes in his interactions with others, especially with Evelyn. She had become more than just his housekeeper, she was now a sounding board, a source of inspiration challenging him to dig deeper. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, he called a meeting with his management team. The atmosphere was tense as he laid out his new vision for Blake Enterprises, one that would center around social responsibility and community engagement. He shared Evelyn's insights, her passionate arguments about the importance of connecting with the very people their business served. To succeed, we must adapt, Richard declared, his voice steady and confident. We can no longer prioritize profits over people. It's time we become a company that stands for something meaningful. The management team was visibly taken aback, exchanging glances filled with skepticism and curiosity. One of his senior executives, a sharp-witted woman named Sarah, raised an eyebrow. And how do you propose we achieve this? We've built our reputation on financial success. By redefining our success, Richard replied, his eyes sparkling with determination. We will hold community forums, encourage employee feedback, and invest in social programs that align with our business goals. We will be transparent about our processes and accountable for our decisions. The discussion that followed was heated, with some managers expressing doubts and others leaning into the vision. But for Richard, the seeds of change had been planted. He felt a sense of empowerment growing within him, fueled by the thought of breaking free from the confines of his previous mindset. As the meeting concluded, Richard caught sight of Evelyn in the corner of the room, a proud smile gracing her lips. Her presence had become a source of strength, a reminder that transformation was possible. He approached her after the meeting, feeling a rush of gratitude. "Thank you for pushing me," he said sincerely. "I didn't realize how much I needed this until now." Evelyn's smile widened. "You're the one who took the first step, Richard. It's all about recognizing the potential for change within yourself." Days turned into weeks, and Richard worked tirelessly to implement his new vision. He organized community meetings, inviting employees and their families to share their thoughts and concerns. He discovered a wealth of untapped knowledge and insight from those who had been overshadowed by the corporate machine. As he listened to their stories, Richard felt a profound sense of purpose growing within him. He began to understand that leadership was not just about making decisions from the top down, it was about cultivating an environment where everyone felt valued and heard. Yet, amidst the whirlwind of change, the tension between Richard and Evelyn simmered beneath the surface. While their professional relationship flourished, an unspoken bond began to develop, a connection that felt both exciting and terrifying. Richard often caught himself stealing glances at her during meetings, marveling at her poise and conviction. One evening, as they reviewed the feedback from a community meeting, Richard finally broached the subject that had been lingering in his mind. "Evelyn," he began, his voice laced with uncertainty, "I've been thinking about us." Evelyn looked up from her notes, surprise flashing across her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean, the way we've been working together. It feels different now. I don't want to just be your employer, I want to be your partner in this journey," he confessed, his heart racing. A moment of silence stretched between them, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Evelyn's eyes softened as she considered his request. "Richard, I appreciate that. But we have to be cautious. Our relationship is already complex." "I know," he said, stepping closer, a sense of vulnerability washing over him. "But I believe we can navigate this together. I respect you, not just as my housekeeper, but as someone who challenges me to be better. I don't want to lose that." Evelyn hesitated, the gravity of his words weighing heavily on her heart. She had always admired Richard's drive, but the line between professional respect and personal feelings was delicate. "Let's focus on the changes we're making first," she suggested gently. "We can figure out the rest as we go along." Richard nodded, respect flooding through him. "You're right. Let's put our efforts into this transformation. It's important, and I need you by my side." With that, they returned to their work, both aware that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but also filled with potential for growth, both as individuals and as a team. Little did they know that the changes they were igniting would not only reshape their company but would also lead them down an unforeseen path of connection and discovery. As the weeks unfolded, Richard and Evelyn embarked on a transformative journey, not just for Blake Enterprises, but for themselves as individuals. The initiatives they introduced, which centered around community engagement and employee empowerment, began to take shape, and the positive changes reverberated through the company like ripples on water. Town hall meetings became a staple of the corporate calendar, where employees and their families were invited to voice their concerns and suggestions. Richard discovered a wellspring of talent and creativity among his staff, people who had been overlooked for far too long. Ideas flowed freely, and the company's culture began to shift toward inclusivity and innovation. Evelyn, who had once felt invisible in the world of corporate business, now found herself in a position of influence. Her insights were valued, and she was often called upon to lead discussions, guiding Richard in understanding the intricacies of his employees' experiences. As she stood before her peers, speaking with conviction about the importance of community and responsibility, a sense of purpose ignited within her. One particularly impactful meeting left Richard astounded. As they gathered in the company's conference room, a group of employees presented a proposal for a community outreach program aimed at providing mentorship to local youth. The enthusiasm in the room was infectious, and Richard could see the passion in their eyes. He could feel it. As they concluded their presentation, a young employee named Carlos stood up, his hands trembling slightly. This program could change lives. I remember being in that position, looking for guidance and support. If we can provide that to the next generation, we'll be making a real difference. Richard glanced at Evelyn, who nodded encouragingly, her eyes shining with pride. This was the moment he had hoped for, the moment when his team realized that they were not just cogs in a machine but active participants in something larger than themselves. That's exactly right, Carlos, Richard affirmed, feeling a wave of inspiration wash over him. We need to invest in our community and the future. Let's move forward with this proposal. The room erupted in applause, and Evelyn's heart swelled with pride for Richard's leadership. He had embraced the vision they had crafted together, transforming it into actionable steps that would not only enhance the company's image but also create a legacy of positivity. However, as the company flourished, Richard grappled with the underlying tension that had developed between him and Evelyn. Their professional relationship was blossoming, yet an unspoken fear lingered. What would happen if they crossed the line into something more personal? One evening, after a long day filled with meetings and discussions, Richard found himself working late in the office. The rain pattered softly against the window as he stared out into the darkness, lost in thought. He was proud of the progress they had made, but he felt an emptiness within him that he could not quite articulate. Evelyn arrived with a stack of reports, her presence a warm light in the dim office. I brought the feedback from the last community meeting, she said, her smile brightening the room. People are really excited about the changes. Thanks, Evelyn, he replied, his heart fluttering at the sight of her. You've done an incredible job bringing everyone together. As she began to sort through the documents, Richard's mind raced. The connection between them had deepened, and he could no longer ignore the feelings that had been bubbling beneath the surface. He wanted to tell her, to confess the admiration he held for her, not just as an employee, but as a person. Evelyn, he began hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to talk to you about something important. She looked up, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. What is it? Taking a deep breath, Richard decided to lay his cards on the table. I've been thinking a lot about us. The way we've been working together. I feel like we've developed a bond that goes beyond just employer and employee. Evelyn's heart raced, the implications of his words washing over her. I feel it too, Richard. But we need to be careful. Our roles complicate things. I know, he replied, stepping closer, the distance between them shrinking. But I can't ignore how much I respect you and how you've inspired me to become a better leader. You've changed the way I see the world, and I want to explore that connection with you. The air was thick with tension as Evelyn searched his eyes, trying to decipher his intentions. She had grown fond of him, of the man he was becoming, but the fear of crossing that line loomed large. What if this complicates things? What if we don't work as well together if we let emotions get involved? Richard nodded, understanding her hesitation. You're right. It's a risk. But I believe it's a risk worth taking. We've already changed the course of this company together. Imagine what we could accomplish if we opened ourselves to this possibility. Evelyn took a step back, her heart pounding. Let's take it slow, she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. We can focus on the work we're doing, and if this connection grows, we'll address it when the time is right." Richard's heart sank slightly, but he respected her wishes. "That sounds fair. I just needed you to know how I feel. No matter what, I want to continue building this company together." As they returned to their work, the unspoken understanding between them hung in the air. Both knew they were at a crossroads, not just in their personal relationship, but in their professional journey as well. Weeks turned into months, and the community outreach program launched successfully, receiving overwhelming support from both employees and locals. Richard watched in awe as Evelyn flourished in her role, organizing events and fostering connections that had long been absent from the company culture. But as the success of the initiative grew, so did the complexity of their relationship. Richard often found himself grappling with a mix of admiration and longing, while Evelyn navigated her own feelings of respect and attraction. They worked closely together, sharing late nights and brainstorming sessions, but the boundary between professional camaraderie and personal connection felt increasingly blurred. One sunny afternoon, during a community event, Evelyn caught Richard watching her interact with the children who had come to participate in their mentorship program. His expression was one of pride and admiration, and for a moment, their eyes locked. In that fleeting second, everything else faded away, and Evelyn felt a surge of emotions swell within her. "Richard," she called out, breaking the spell. He approached, a tentative smile on his lips. "Hey, you're doing amazing work here," he said, nodding toward the group of children eagerly listening to her stories. "They adore you." "It's easy to connect with them," she replied, her voice soft. "They remind me of why we're doing this, to make a difference." Richard's gaze lingered on her, his heart racing. "You've made a difference in my life too, Evelyn. I don't think I would be where I am now without you pushing me to change." Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest. The sincerity in his words ignited a flicker of hope within her. "We've changed each other, Richard. And I'm grateful for that." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the event, Richard took a deep breath, his heart pounding with the need to say more. "Evelyn, I know we agreed to take things slow, but I can't help but feel that we're missing an opportunity to truly explore what's between us." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she searched his eyes. There was an intensity there that made her heart race. "I want that too, Richard. But we have to be careful. We've built something special here, and I don't want to jeopardize it." "I understand," he replied, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But I can't ignore how I feel. I want to be honest with you." Their faces were mere inches apart, the world around them fading into the background. Evelyn could feel the heat radiating from him, a magnetism that was hard to resist. "What if we just take it one day at a time?" she suggested, her heart racing with anticipation. Richard smiled, a mix of relief and joy washing over him. "I can live with that." The tension broke as they returned to the event, their hands brushing against each other as they moved through the crowd. It felt natural, effortless, and as they laughed and shared stories with the children, a new chapter of their relationship began to unfold, one built on mutual respect, admiration, and the potential for something deeper. As the community outreach program continued to thrive, so did their bond. They learned to balance their professional responsibilities with the growing connection that blossomed between them. Each moment spent together brought them closer, yet they remained committed to ensuring their relationship did not overshadow their work. Over time, Richard began to embrace the lessons he had learned from Evelyn, recognizing that true leadership meant understanding and valuing the people around him. He became a champion for change, advocating for new policies and initiatives that prioritized the well-being of employees and the community. Their project gained recognition, and Richard found himself standing at the podium, addressing a crowd of supporters and community members. As he spoke passionately about the impact of their outreach efforts, he caught a glimpse of Evelyn in the audience, her eyes shining with pride. After the event, they stood together outside, the evening air filled with laughter and celebration. Richard turned to her, his expression earnest. "None of this would have been possible without you, Evelyn. You've been the heart of this transformation." Evelyn smiled, a warmth flooding through her. "We've done this together, Richard. You took the leap, and I'm grateful for that." In that moment, Richard leaned in, his heart racing as he captured her gaze. "Evelyn, I want to take our relationship further. I care about you deeply, and I believe we can create something beautiful together, both personally and professionally." Evelyn's heart swelled at his words. "I care about you too, Richard. I've always admired your determination and your willingness to change. I just want to ensure we do this right." As they shared their first tentative kiss, a spark ignited between them, filling the air with possibility. It was a moment that transcended their previous roles, a promise of partnership and growth, both in their personal lives and in the work they had dedicated themselves to. Their journey continued, one filled with challenges and triumphs, but with each step, they leaned on each other for support. Together, they forged a path that was both fulfilling and transformative, proving that when two people unite with a shared vision, the potential for change is limitless. As Richard reflected on his journey, he realized how far he had come, from a self-centered businessman to a leader who valued connection and purpose. Evelyn had not only opened his eyes to the importance of community but had also shown him the power of love and partnership. In the end, it was not just about building a successful company, it was about creating a legacy of compassion, understanding, and connection, a legacy that would inspire future generations to prioritize people over profits. And so, as they stood together, hand in hand, gazing toward a future filled with promise, Richard knew that true success lay not in the numbers, but in the meaningful relationships forged along the way.